All right, so I just wanted to start off with, I guess it's a little bit of a history lesson, but be it if you're a brand new user or if you've been using Esri for donkey's years, I just wanted to acknowledge how quickly both GIS and web technology has kind of moved over the years. So back in '96, Map Objects IMS, Internet Map Server. Did anyone use this? Is anyone in the room? Okay, there's a few. So this was, I didn't use this, but it was, I think, moving your .NET desktop apps and translating them to the web, I believe. ArcView IMS, this quickly evolved into the popular ArcIMS product back in 2000. This is where the server did all the hard work, creating the static images to send down to the client. You had to tinker with those ArcXML files. 2004, ArcGIS Server came along at version 9.0. Some of you may remember some of the early application builders. So there was the Web ADF, which was pretty hard work, and then the Flex Viewer, which was a very popular viewer that still see a few of those around today. Now, not shown here is ArcGIS Online, which came along in 2007, and this came along with its own kind of unique capabilities, and it started to make sense to bring some of those capabilities alongside the ArcGIS Server product. So at 10.3, Portal for ArcGIS was released. Initially, this was a paid extension, but then it was then bundled into ArcGIS Server 10.4 as a, well, they threw it in for free. And then today we have ArcGIS Enterprise, which is 10.5. And I don't know, I just look at this and the capabilities that are in the product today is pretty crazy. You've got application builders for native, for web. You've got a whole range of configurable apps, even configurable apps for different industries like local government and utilities. You can crunch big data, be it vector or raster with distributed computing. There's that real-time GIS analytics, deployment builders for on-premises and on the cloud. And there's a huge range of Australian content in the Living Atlas, which is worth being aware of, along with the huge ecosystem of partner apps that are being built on top of the platform. It's my job to keep up with this stuff, and I struggle. So I think that's a good thing. It's kind of, but it is ramping up in the amount of stuff that's coming out. Okay, ArcGIS 4 Server is no longer the name. So ArcGIS 4 Server has been rebranded to ArcGIS Enterprise. Now, what I would like to point out is that ArcGIS Enterprise is just a product name, and it's still comprised of several distinct software applications. So ArcGIS Server, without the 4, is still a key foundational component as part of ArcGIS Enterprise. It's really the engine that drives the whole thing. It's basically, yeah, it does a lot of the actual computational tasks that you're probably aware of. And it's just like how it was, but it also has a range of new capabilities that we'll go through. Portal for ArcGIS, this enables access control. It's the user-friendly front end to your GIS. And then there's the ArcGIS Data Store, which I think is a vital data storage component. I'll talk more about that later on, because sometimes there's a few questions around that. And then, of course, the web adapter. This integrates with your existing web servers and your existing security stores. Now, this slide, I personally think is probably the most important slide in the deck. It took me a while to actually click and get this. A new and important change at 10.5 is the concept of server roles. Now, Esri have made some changes to the licensing model, which are in your favor, to best align with the practice of workload separation. So there's a single software component that you install, and that's ArcGIS Server. And then depending on what license you apply to it, it'll enable different server capabilities. So for example, the GIS server role, that is what I'd imagine all of us think of when we think of ArcGIS Server. It's map services, tiled services, geocode services, geometry service, printing service, those style of services. But you then have additional server roles. So you can install ArcGIS Server and just apply the image server license to it now. And that'll just allow you to create image services for serving and processing your collections of imagery. The same with GeoEvent. You can now install ArcGIS Server, apply a GeoEvent server license, and enable the real-time capabilities. GeoAnalytics Server, you might have seen that in the plenary. That's new at 10.5, performing analytics on big data using distributed nodes. And Business Analyst Server, which is a bit of a niche product, but it's a good one. This is for it has a whole range of targeted tools for territory planning and site selection and that kind of thing. But the key point here is there's just one application, ArcGIS Server. You install that, you apply a license role or multiple roles, and it enables those capabilities. Now, a foundational setup of ArcGIS Enterprise will consist of a number of those components configured in a certain way, and that's what's called a base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. Now, the base deployment gives you the same capabilities that you actually get with ArcGIS Online, along with the same capabilities you get with ArcGIS Server as well. It provides that WebGIS capability, but on your own infrastructure. And look, you can still use a standalone ArcGIS Server without all of the other pieces, and it might be likely that a few of you are still doing that, and that's totally fine. It's still supported at 10.5. But from 10.5, ArcGIS Enterprise has been designed so that newer capabilities will require this base deployment as a minimum configuration to connect to. With this base deployment, there's now essentially 3 tiers to consider. You've got Portal for ArcGIS, you've got ArcGIS Server with that GIS Server role applied to it, and then also the ArcGIS Data Store. And an early decision you might need to think about is, well, do I want to put all of this onto one machine, or do I want to separate it out onto separate machines? And from a licensing perspective, there's actually no additional cost for separating out all of these individual components onto separate machines. I know infrastructure has a cost, but from our side, there's no extra costs. And all of these components could be on a single machine, like I've done that on my machine, so it's suitable for a dev or a sandpit environment, but also for some smaller production environments as well. But if you anticipate that you're going to be scaling out at any point in the future, it's quite tricky to start separating these out onto separate boxes later on. So if you think that that's going to happen, it's better off to start off with these on separate instances. Now, I also wanted to touch on some of the alternative approaches for installing the components. So you've still got the installer files that you've probably used before. With 10.5.1, there's what's called the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. And this takes care of setting up that entire base deployment. At the moment, it's only on a single machine, but it takes care of a lot of those extra tasks, like federating the server, specifying it as the hosting server, dealing with certificates. So that's well worth looking into. Deploying to Amazon or Azure is now very straightforward. There's templates and cloud builder apps, and these are supported images from Esri that walk you through the process of deploying the base deployment, but also across multiple machines. And then Chef, I think this is also worth a look as well. There's nothing to do with Esri. It's a very popular tool for automating the deployment of infrastructure. And this is regardless of if it's on your own infrastructure or if it's on the cloud, if you're using Linux or Windows or even a mix, if you're using 3 machines or 300 machines. It walks you through, or allows you to come up with a repeatable process to keep redeploying your infrastructure if it's lost or you just want that extra backup. And Esri have provided what's called Chef cookbooks that can be used as templates to deploy that base deployment. Now at 10.4, you just had one type of named user. At 10.5, to match ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise has now introduced 2 levels of named user. So that former named user is now what we call a level 2 named user. And this is the all bells and singing. You can do anything with this. You could be an administrator, you could publish maps, you could just create maps and apps, you can log into Collector, you can pretty much do anything you want with this. And you can still fine-tune these roles, these users with roles in the portal as well. But what is new is the level 1 named user. So this came about because many Esri customers reported that they wanted the ability to share private content more broadly within the organization. And as much as we would love it if we had everyone in the organization creating apps and using analysis tools and doing full WebGIS. In reality, it's not quite the case. So this level 1 is a cost-effective way to share those important information products that you have, but without giving up control over what information is seen by whom within your organization. So they can view private content such as maps and apps, but they can't create new maps and apps. But maybe your exec or your boss doesn't care about creating maps and apps. And you get 30 of these for free with your enterprise license. So that's always handy. So you might dish these out within your organization. You might give the more powerful level 2 named user to maybe members of the GIS team, the administrator, those users in the business that need to be able to create maps and apps, and also those that need to use the mobility apps like Collector and Explorer. And then you might use the level 1 user to give it to users that just need to view that private content within your organization. But Private being the key word there, because I want to emphasize that if your ArcGIS Enterprise is behind your firewall, you've still got everyone else in the organization, and you can still share maps and apps to everyone, but it's only everyone within your network, and they don't need a named user to access that content. Now, I wanted to clear up some confusion over this guy, the ArcGIS data store. I had questions, what is it? Do I need it? What's its purpose? So let's run through this. There's actually 3 different types of ArcGIS data store. The first 2 being required for that base deployment. The relational data store type is what enables hosted feature layers. Like under the hood, it's essentially a DBMS. The tile cache is not for tile services. It's actually for your 3D hosted scene services, so it enables 3D capabilities within your portal. And the spatiotemporal, this is really only needed by GeoEvent and the geoanalytics server roles. It's, again, under the hood, it's a NoSQL data store for dealing with high volume data. Now, focusing on that relational ArcGIS data store, this isn't the equivalent of an enterprise geodatabase. They serve quite different workflows. So your enterprise geodatabase, be it in SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, whatever, that's where you should be managing your authoritative GIS layers. So your utility network, or your parcel fabric, or your roads and streets and parcels. It allows you to set up topologies. You can deal with archiving or complex data models. There's support for types like annotation layers or schematics and many more items that the ArcGIS data store just hasn't been designed for, and that's not its purpose. Another key difference is with the ArcGIS data store, you can only access the data in it through the web services. You shouldn't be accessing the data via a direct connection. It's only through the actual web service that you should be doing that. But the biggest benefit of the ArcGIS data store, for me anyway, is its ability to publish thousands of what's called hosted feature services on a single machine without putting too much impact on your GIS server. So hands up in the room who's done some sort of ArcGIS server administration before, or has done okay, a fair few of you. So you'll be familiar with those ArcSoc processes that run in the background, and they're using ArcObjects as well, and they use up a lot of memory, really, to be frank. And these hosted feature layers, they have a far lower memory footprint, and they don't use ArcSoc processes, so they're much more scalable. They really rely on the relational database within the ArcGIS data store to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And data is streamed from that database via the GIS server to your clients. So let's have a look at how this can be used. So actually before that, another thing with some of those diagrams, some people think, well, hang on, you're replacing the ArcGIS data, the enterprise geodatabase with an ArcGIS data store. That's not the case. You can still register your traditional enterprise geodatabases alongside that base deployment. The ArcGIS data store is just another one of these required bits in the puzzle. Okay, so an example of how this might be used. Here we have a web map that the GIS team has shared within the organization, and all of the layers in this web map, they're coming from the enterprise geodatabase via traditional feature services and map services. And these layers are maintained by the GIS team, your utility networks, your assets, your parks, your roadworks, parcels, streets, and so on. And the team would use ArcGIS Desktop to edit those layers directly from the database, making use of versioning workflows and Q&A procedures. But then, as a portal user, maybe they've been sent a CSV file of some addresses. They don't want to have to they don't want to have to ask the GIS team, can you just geocode these addresses and publish it to the server so I can see it, because it's going to take a bit of time. And vice versa, as the GIS team, you don't want to give them the ability to publish to the ArcGIS server because they're going to, do all sorts of things that you probably don't want them doing. But with that ArcGIS data store in place, it allows them to, in this case, just drag and drop those CSV file onto the map, and they can then persist that and save that, and that goes into the ArcGIS data store without really putting any impact on your GIS server. Another workflow, maybe a portal user just been sent a shapefile. They can upload that to the portal, publish it as a hosted feature layer, persist it in there, and access it and share it with the rest of the organization. Again, ArcGIS data store. It's not putting any load or too much stress on your GIS server. There's a lot of Esri apps now, like ArcGIS Maps for Office, that allow users to share content back into the portal. Again, that gets stored and persisted into the ArcGIS data store. There's been a lot of interest in this guy. This is the Insights application. This not only requires a base deployment, but it makes heavy use, actually, of the ArcGIS data store for storing both interim results and new results as part of the kind of workflow. Analysis services, so a base deployment will also allow your users to use a wide range of analysis tools, so buffering, clipping, intersecting, dissolving, joining, interpolating, drive times if you include some routing data. But all those analysis tools, they create and derive new outputs, so they're only possible if you have that ArcGIS data store to store those outputs into. Now, I'd imagine there was a few ArcGIS Server admins in here, hopefully that sort of clarifies the purpose of why it's kind of as part of the stack, but I know probably a few of you thinking, well, hang on, data management, how do I deal with this? It's, and I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, but I'll happily have a one-on-one conversation with you on the ArcLab, but it does require a bit of thought into having a best practice kind of workflow and sort of keeping track of that data store. But it depends on the client, so we can talk about that offline if you would like to. Now, I wanted to squeeze this one in because anyone using Web App Builder in the room? A few of you, cool. So a 10.5.1, Web App Builder for ArcGIS, the one that's embedded in your portal, now supports custom widgets. So this means you can now leverage the large number of custom widgets released both by Esri and the developer community at large. And then portal members will be able to access and use those custom widgets without needing that developer edition of Web App Builder. It'll be embedded in your portal as well. And these are just some of the ones that I like, but there's hundreds of these that you can download and use in Web App Builder. The first step is just searching for the one you want, or if you've got developers, building your own. You download it. You then place it on a web server like IIS, Esri, whatever you fancy. You then log into the portal, and you add this new portal item type. I think you have to add this. You have to log in as an administrator to register these widgets. You pointed at the widgets manifest file, which is just part of the download of a widget. And then when you're in Web App Builder, let's say you're not an administrator, you're just a typical portal user who's got the ability to create apps, they can now access any of those custom widgets from the embedded Web App Builder in portal to use. Which is pretty cool. I think that'll be a useful one. Now, I wanted to finish off, I'm kind of running out of time, but I really just wanted to show some real-life deployments of ArcGIS Enterprise out in the wild. AGO, so this is the Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation. So just bullet point this then. So all virtual infrastructure, completely disconnected network as you'd expect, so zero internet. All servers are behind IIS web adapters, which enforce integrated Windows authentication. So on the left here, you can kind of see that base deployment. The GIS server has been registered and federated with the portal. Both of them are actually sharing one web adapter, which is unusual. Usually we'd have two, but whatever. And then they've got these separate ArcGIS servers that have been installed for dedicated server roles. So they've got one for cached services, one for imagery, and another one for geoprocessing services. They've also included the ArcGIS Enterprise Monitor tool, which keeps an eye on each of these systems and how they're behaving, so you can, it's kind of like an alerting tool without ramping the log levels up. Australia Post, completely deployed on Amazon, auto-scaling at the GIS tier level so that they only pay for what they need. They're using Amazon RDS, which I was talking to him at the Melbourne event. He was saying that's actually, they've chosen to use the Postgres version of Amazon RDS as opposed to SQL Server because it's 50% cheaper apparently, which I thought was pretty cool. Another one is Geoscience Australia. Some of these diagrams have kind of simplified down a bit because the bigger architecture diagrams are pretty complicated. But again, all on Amazon. Each of these sites that have got dedicated server roles is actually multiple machines participating in each of those sites. You've got the ArcGIS data store set up with a secondary one for failover. They've also got the ArcGIS data store with the spatial temporal enabled for geoanalytics. And yeah, I think this has also been mirrored in a separate region for disaster recovery as well. I can pull out any of these diagrams, or the more detailed ones if anyone's interested. So just to wrap up, I do encourage you to deploy that base deployment. If you're sort of looking at an upgrade, start thinking about bringing in the portal component and the data store. You can tie multiple ArcGIS server sites with different roles applied to that base deployment, and this is done through federation, and this is the recommended pattern moving forward. And that ArcGIS data store really is a critical component to enable a lot of those newer capabilities in ArcGIS Enterprise, both for the relational and also the 3D content as well. I think we've got time for a few questions. No, a couple? Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon. We now have a few minutes for questions, so...
Anyone?
Okay, I've got a question. How does ArcGIS Pro handle publishing to server?
So, good question, one that I should have canned an answer for, but ArcGIS Pro has been designed, so ArcMap was still pretty good at publishing directly to a GIS server, but ArcGIS Pro has really been designed with that base deployment in mind, so a lot of the 3D content, a lot of, like if you want to create a web map, you can do that in Pro and share that to the portal and everything kind of gets translated across, so yeah, it's been designed in mind with Pro for publishing.
Yeah.
Thanks. There's a question here.
Hi, you demonstrated the collaboration feature earlier today.
Yep.
What's the minimum server config you need for that?
10.5.1. Sorry, there is a dedicated session, not the next one, but the one after that in this room. Josh will be going through the finer detail, and this morning was very, very high level, but he'll be going through the back end and what's going on.
So the base 3 products you started your stack with? It comes with the base 3 products you started your stack with?
Yeah, so that base deployment, if you've got another organisation or if you've got 2 enterprises within your business, 10.5.1, those 2 can do that collaboration, correct, yeah. Thanks. I'll be on the Arc Lab for the rest of the afternoon, so if you want to brainstorm anything, please come talk to me. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Simon.